Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Flight of the Shirán by R.K. Lander, narrated by Gary Bennett. Chapter 1. First Flight. In the first Elven world, Fel'annár was once Fel'annár of Lantaria, warlord, lost son found, sylvan legend who passed in the blink of an eye. In the second world of Nazaran, he was a simple warrior, in peace an elf searching for the memories of a lifetime lost. But in war, he was a dragon, his mission to destroy the Tel'aran, to kill Arzen, the revenant demigod. They say the only way to kill a light wielder is to wield light, but Fel'annár couldn't remember how. Diaries, High Master Domini Sebat. Fel'annár had just turned into a dragon and flown over a world he hardly knew. He should have been on his knees, jabbering nonsense to the gods, but all he could see was the haunch of roasted meat on the table before him, the way candlelight caught on the juicy, glistening skin. He reached out, ignored the pain as he burned his fingertips on his steaming prize. He could hardly feel it as he pulled off a leg, watched in barely contained fascination as the tender flesh flaked away from the bone, soft as warm butter. Fel'annár had never been hungrier in either of his two lives. He wrapped his lips around the meat and closed his eyes, not before showing the whites of his eyes to his table companions. His eyeballs rolled into the back of his head, nostrils flaring as he began to chew, slow and hard. Squarias Tantor and Ezra watched the spectacle, shock warring with disbelief as they ate their own meals, far slower than their new brother, beside whom Ortalan munched happily, his characteristic frown gone, replaced by the joy of one who knows he is free at last. "Did she tell you herself, then?" Commander General Tantor chewed steadily as he waited for Ortalan to enlighten him. "No, but I can feel it. My guiding light is no longer trapped. I am no longer exiled from Beleriand. My liminality is returned." Fel'annár could only assume his grandfather was talking about Arya's punishment, the one she had imposed on him for breaking the rules and bringing Fel'annár back to life when, rightly, he should have died over a century ago instead of just weeks past. He was grateful for Ortalan's disobedience, for the children he would later have. His hand stopped midway to his mouth, the face of Talonor appearing in his mind, looking back at him placidly, patiently waiting for a day Fel'annár knew would come. The day he had resolved to live for, his judgment day. He shuffled more food into his mouth and chewed a little too fast. He swallowed hard and breathed deeply. "Have you finished?" Sarcasm dripped from Squaria Ezra's words, like the grease from his meat, leaving Fel'annár to wonder whether the question was ill-intended. He decided it was. "No." He reached for the bread, tore a chunk off, and stuffed it into his mouth, sending crumbs all over the table, bright blue eyes fixed on his fellow Squaria, one-time trainee captain and his antagonist. Fel'annár had pummeled the snot out of him, and had endured his own punishment. As for Ezra, he had lost his incipient command and was now a base warrior, just like Fel'annár himself. "So, are you going to take up your position as second-in-command?" Fel'annár spoke through the food in his mouth, but it was articulate enough for Ortalan to understand. The general turned to his grandson thoughtfully. "I made a promise." Tantor stopped eating, reached for his goblet, and drank, watching Ortalan from across the table. "I won't force you to accept if you don't want to. You know that." Ezra looked between the commander and general, and Fel'annár thought he knew exactly what was going through his devious mind, could see the Squaria's vested interest in the question. Fel'annár was tempted to say something cutting, but his hunger got the better of him, and he stuffed a whole credel into his mouth. "I want to accept, Tantor. However, Fel'annár's training is a personal matter, and you promised me that would be my duty, together with Linon and Tensari. There's nothing to stop you from accepting the position as my second and serving in the field, but granted, I would need you here more often than you have been of late." Ortalan shrugged as he dipped his bread into a pot of creamy cheese. "That largely depends on Ezra here, whether he can step up his leadership skills or not. I can't have a dragon fucking up the good relations I've established between the Shirán and the Elven Alliance." Ortalan shoved the dripping bread into his mouth, a challenging stare riveted on Ezra. Wiping his mouth, he continued. Besides, you know Panisar. He wants nothing more than the captaincy he's already achieved. Being a commander in his first life was more than enough for him. Ortalan stared at his food, and Fel'annár rather thought he was holding back. But, as usual, he couldn't remember much of anything about Panisar, even though he must have known about it. He bit down hard on another cradle, just as Ezra leaned forward, bold gaze on Ortalan. I won't fuck it up. He threw his knife onto his plate and leaned back in his chair. You'd better not, mumbled Ortalan. Fel'annár smirked, wiped his mouth on his napkin, satisfied at the peeved glare Ezra seemed to think would unnerve Ortalan. Instead, he puffed a laugh. Fel'annár reached out and fisted a pile of cradles, dropped them onto the plate in front of him with a clatter. He looked down at them, took a deep breath, and began to eat them. I still remember my first time cross-fleshing. I could have eaten a whole whale in sauce with peas, and even then it wouldn't have been enough. Tantor was staring into the past while Ortalan nodded. It happens to all of us. So, tell me, Fel'annár, now that the initial shock seems to have worn off, what's going through that mind of yours? What did the world look and feel like through the eyes of Xionar Lightlord? Fel'annár sat back, only now uncomfortably aware that he'd eaten far too much. I can't describe it. I don't think words exist. I should have been terrified. I mean, I was. Until I was Holy Dragon and fear just faded away. The other three squires smiled, even Ezra, but Fel'annár hadn't finished. I could see for leagues, hear things no elf can. I felt powerful, and I remember telling myself that I might fall or crash into something. But I just knew what to do, how to fly, and that I wouldn't fall. Until you fly in bad weather or you need to take evasive action, you will fall, and it will hurt, I guarantee you that. Fel'annár nodded at Tantor, trying to ignore Ezra's snicker, but he wasn't entirely successful. Anger threatened to loose his tongue, but Ortalan was quick to speak. Well, that's what the second stage of our training is all about, isn't it? I'll take care that you don't break your squire neck. But first, there are formalities to attend to. Ortalan turned to Fel'annár in his seat. Are you ready for tonight? Fel'annár wasn't sure that he was. He was bone-tired, and his stomach was stretched almost beyond its capability. Still, there was plenty of time before the evening celebrations, and the moment he would reveal to Tantor his God-given mission. Ready? Fel'annár shrugged, then threw his knife down on the cradle shells. Perhaps. I could do without the pomp, though. Why can't I just tell you here and now? Oh, come, brother. You need to relax. Take that stick out of your ass and enjoy yourself. Fel'annár turned thunderous eyes on Ezra, lip curling. Enjoy. The word had come out almost a growl, but the idiot did that to him. What was there to enjoy about this life? He hardly had any memories, and the ones he did have were the wrong ones, the ones he would rather have forgotten. All he wanted to do was get on with it, for the days, weeks, months, and years to pass until he found Talonor once more, beg him for the forgiveness his only son could grant, and even then he needed to forgive himself. Although there's no stick up your ass, I do agree that you should try to relax, even if it is just for one night, Fel'annár. Ortalan nodded at him, his softly spoken words carrying an unmistakable note of command. Besides, there are reasons as to why your purpose must be revealed to all Origenta. The Order of Shirán is a brotherhood. Everyone knows each other's purposes, so that we can help, should circumstance allow. Not like I have a choice, is it? You do not. Go home, sleep, then go to Airland at sunset. Fel'annár nodded at the commander, rose from his chair, and Ortalan stood with him. I've sent some things on to the house. Wear them as a symbol of your duty to Clan Squaria, to Arya, and to Gallo. As for myself, know that as a general, I am glad to welcome you into this Brotherhood of War, as one more Shirán warrior. But as a grandfather, I am proud of you, as I ever was. Fel'annár pursed his lips, nodded slowly. As a warrior, I will serve to the best of my abilities. As a grandson, I can't guarantee that I'll ever be worthy of that pride. Ortalan glanced at Tantor before turning back to Fel'annár. So long as you try, my son. Fel'annár said nothing, bowed to his fellow squarias, even to Ezra, and left the room. Ortalan watched him leave and then turned to Tantor. He's still angry. Tantor nodded. And I think he always will be. Fel'annár spent the entire road home with a wooden smile on his face. The Shirán waved, bowed, patted him on the shoulder, or called out to him from the boughs of Origenta. Their anticipation of the evening's events was all too clear to one who had no intention of enjoying himself, and so he nodded, waved back stiffly, and stepped up his pace. Once home, he shut the door behind him and leant against it, closed his eyes, and willed away the unwanted feelings. He told himself not to be angry, that they were simply doing what they would with any other new Shirán, that it had nothing to do with who he'd been, the elf he still couldn't remember. Of course, it could also be because he was Squaria, the least common of all the clans. But there was another explanation. They knew he had been a light wielder, and even though Fel'annár couldn't remember what that was, he did understand it was important, if not why. If only they knew he had no idea what to do with the faint lights that collected in his hands when he weaved the dohai. Should he try, he'd probably end up killing himself in some embarrassing way before he could figure out how to use it against the enemy, live up to the expectations others seemed to have. He just wished he could melt into the background, pass by anonymously, be just one more warrior with no other obligation than to kill his enemies. Pushing away from the door, he walked toward his bedroom, hoping no one else was there. No Tensari, no Linon or Manon, no Benzir or Anara. Alas, Saijon was standing before a table piled with clothing and other cloth-wrapped articles. These were surely the things Ortalan had sent and expected him to wear. Saijon, he greeted with a curt nod, gaze falling to the littered table. I trust your lunch was satisfying? The Falkite pursed his lips, a crooked smile threatening to spoil his nonchalant expression. Fel'annár didn't want to laugh, but it bubbled out of his mouth before he could stop it. He sauntered to the table and reached out to a black leather and silver cuirass. Turning it the right way up, the symbol of the Order of Shirán stared up at him from a circle at the very center, the same symbol that was painted on the inside of his wrists. He trailed the back of his fingers over it, reminding himself of the preposterous fact that there was a dragon inside him should he turn his key and conjure it. His eyes strayed to the pauldrons, one of them larger than the other. It was shaped into the head of a dragon plunging downwards in flight. It would cover his entire upper arm from shoulder to elbow. It was the vambraces that truly caught his attention. A gift from your clan, together with the rest of your uniform. But these were specially commissioned by the general himself. You have the most beautiful braces I have ever seen. They were indeed a work of exquisite art. For anyone standing before him, a snarling dragon seemed to surge from the leather, 2 rubies for eyes. The rest of its body curled around the forearm, finishing at the wrist and the symbol of the Order of Shirán. Under the black and silver armor were black breeches and new boots with silver filigree around the heels. A small package to one side drew his attention. He reached for it, untied the loose knot, and pulled back the cloth. A colonnade dagger stared back at him, crafted from opulent silver and gold, the jewel-studded pommel casting colorful winks of light over the wooden walls of his tree home. Fel'annár picked it up, tested its weight and balance, then brought it closer to his eyes. He could see his own reflection in the blade, the now vivid blue of his irises, no longer clouded with confusion and amnesia, at least not entirely. May I see it? Fel'annár held the exquisitely forged dagger out to Saijon, hilt first, watched him inspect it. He'd seen the Falkite sparring with Tensari and Galara on various occasions, knew he was a blade master, but unlike the customs of Belleran, there were no markings on his uniform that accredited his status. It was an irrelevant thing for Fel'annár to remember, just as it was for him to know who had created this dagger. But that was how enlightenment seemed to work. He could remember a decoration, but he couldn't remember the face of his daughter, the love in his wife's eyes. It's a beautiful piece. Saijon offered the dagger back to Fel'annár, who took it reverently in both hands, placing it carefully on the table. Then I will see you again at sunset. Saijon smiled excitedly, a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. But all Fel'annár did was stare back at him coolly. I'm in no mood for celebrations. Saijon's face fell, but it seemed he wasn't entirely deterred from drawing Fel'annár into the festive spirit. Get some rest. He made for the door, but hesitated, turned back to Fel'annár. I look forward to serving with you, not for what or who you were, but for the warrior you are. I expect nothing from you but loyalty. Saijon was reaching out to him as a friend, he could see that much. But Fel'annár didn't know if he could reciprocate, whether he could be a friend to anyone now, save for Benzir and Onara. And that is all I can promise you, Saijon. Whether or not the training captain was disappointed, he couldn't say. But all he did was nod and leave. Fel'annár watched the door close behind him. He was blissfully alone at last, alone with his shock and confusion, with his elation and his insatiable curiosity about his Aramal self. But all those good things merged with his now characteristic drive to stop himself from enjoying this new world. Self-imposed punishment, Benzir called it, while Linon had reminded him that there was no crime to justify it. Maybe they were right. He hadn't purposefully killed Tal'Anor. But it didn't change the fact that it had been his arrow to pierce his chest, kill his own child, and in turn shatter his own soul. Fel'annár had slept away the entire afternoon. Too much food and too much thinking, he supposed. But despite his exhaustion, something in his subconscious mind had awakened, warning him that it was time to get up and prepare for the evening celebrations. He could hear distant talking, muffled words, and laughter. For a moment he wished he could feel what they did, that he could seize the moment and enjoy life, despite what it had thrown at him. He screwed his eyes shut because he didn't want to pity himself. He wanted to live again, feel something again, and the only way to achieve that was through distraction. He needed these idiots who called themselves his friends, but, more importantly, he needed Onara and Benzir. Loath that he was to admit that. Maybe Ezra had been right. Maybe he should just try to enjoy himself, however grotesque the thought was. He forced himself through it, told himself he needed to live again if he had the slightest chance of carrying out Arya's mandate. After all, that was his greatest distraction, his duty to the gods. He took a deep breath, threw the bedclothes back, and sauntered to his wardrobe. His eyes were immediately drawn to the ceremonial uniform that Manon had seen fit to hang for him. Are you decent? No. Linon walked into his room, ignored Fel'annár's arched brow. Why did you ask if you were going to ignore me? The Falkite shrugged. Custom, I suppose. Fel'annár huffed, mumbled something about goshawks and peanuts, to which Linon chuckled and Fel'annár scowled. You heard that. You'll get used to it. Falkites have excellent hearing. There's hot water enough for a bath. I'll call you when it's time. Fel'annár watched Linon leave, then eyed the corridor that led to the bathing chamber. A deep breath, a slow blink. He opened his eyes to a world he'd not asked to be in. He belonged in Belleran, but he knew he would never live there again. Best he got used to it. The loneliness and the yearning for things he couldn't remember, the fear of confronting his family, hearing their judgment. Nazaran was his home now, however much it didn't feel like it. Bolstering his resolve, naked as the day he was born, Fel'annár streaked down the corridor and past the living room, garnering saucy laughter from Tensari and Manon, while Onara covered her eyes, and Benzir laughed. A short while later, Fel'annár emerged, fully dressed and ready for the evening ceremony and celebration. Well, if I'm, Cleans up well, doesn't he, Manon? Said Onara with a wide smile and flashing eyes. Always has, said Linon as he approached, flicked a non-existent speck of dust from the shoulder of Fel'annár's black velvet cloak. He pushed it back to reveal the dragon pauldron, then further down, the vambrace Ortalan had gifted him. On his other side, Tensari smoothed a hand down the blue undertunic, then tugged on the purple sash of a Ka master. You're going to need a chaperone. Fel'annár looked at her. What for? Well, your wife, of course. I don't remember her, so why worry? Tensari looked back at him, only then seeming to realize Fel'annár wasn't wearing his bonding braid as protocol dictated. She glanced at Linon, who shook his head minutely. So what now? Fel'annár inspected his nails, then walked to a side cabinet and poured himself a glass of wine. Manon was soon there, helping himself as he answered the question. Now we stand at attention until the ceremony is through, and then we feast on everything we can get our hands on. Manon smiled, his childlike enthusiasm making Onara chuckle, while Linon raised a brow, clearly unsure as to what the Rhodite had meant by that. Typical Rhodite, always thinking about your Linon. Tensari scowled at him, at the way he pursed his lips in disappointment for not having finished his eloquent sentence. Once Benzir's guffaws subsided, Manon opened the front door, and together the finely dressed Shirán and Domini made for Airland. Despite the banter and Fel'annár's seemingly improved demeanor, Linon hadn't missed his veiled distress at the mention of his wife. Fel'annár would sit on it, mull over his predicament, and abstain should any opportunity arise. But this was Fel'annár, and Linon wasn't sure that he would. Airland was a heaving throng of Shirán warriors, all dressed in their finery. Proud pastus in green undertunics, sprightly Rhodites in russet, elegant Lupites in silvery gray, and fierce Feliforms in beige. They all wore the characteristic black armor over the different colors of their clans. The only differentiating elements were their pauldrons and vambraces. But the symbol of the Order of Shirán blazed brightly tonight under a full rising moon that was dimmed only by the shadow of Origenta itself and its reaching, stretching limbs. On the northern rim of Airland, Commander Tantor stood with General Ortalan at his side. Around them were Commander Lerita and High Master Domini Sabat, the only other civilian in Origenta, apart from Benzir and Donara. His long, fiery red hair was loose, gleaming under the darkening sky and the orange flames from the fire pits that lay dotted around the perimeter of the open platform. With every passing moment they burned brighter as the sky darkened, and the promise of a memorable night crept closer. Have you told them? Lerita's blue eyes settled on Sabat's purple, watching him watch Fel'annár in the distance. My Domini, yes, they know their Baronor, that they will one day face the choice of liminality. I must say I'm surprised that Arya would recruit her divine warriors here in Estuary, among elves not born in the Motherworld, but of Nazaran. Well, technically, Estuary is not Nazaran, as you know, Lerita. All worlds have their transition zones, like Harbor and Belleran. She can venture here, although only has ever done so in Cathedral, as far as we know, of course. It makes me think that Benzir and Onara's purpose is of the highest order. You see, I take for granted it is related to my field of study, which so happens to fascinate Benzir here. But the nature of this recruitment, I wonder if Arya's not thinking more of Fel'annár than she is of philosophy. Time will tell, but for Fel'annár to serve in any purposeful way, he needs to remember how to wield light. Without that, all our efforts will have been for nothing more than the gain of another Shirán warrior. I must accept my part of the responsibility for that. Still, we have Benzir and Onara to thank for bringing him this far. At least he's operational now. You mean he's not suicidal? But is that enough? Lerita turned to Sabat, who smiled as he held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. Don't hate me for being intuitive, Commander, and don't try to deny your thoughts. You hide them well, but I am Domini. Credit where it's due, I suppose, she mumbled. Indeed. And soon we will know whether your gambit paid off, whether it was worth a lifetime of memories. Purple eyes watched the distant figure of a novice Shirán, but Lerita was staring at Sabat's profile. You don't mince words, do you? Not with minds like yours. Why would I? Besides, I'm not a politician, and the gods forbid I ever become one. There is fault in what you've done, what we've both done. The question is, can it be justified in hindsight? We're about to find out. Lerita turned to Tantor and Ortalan, who held both arms up, and then shouted so that all Airland could hear him. It is time to hear the mission of our new brother. It is time. Ortalan waited for the noise to die down before continuing. It is time for Squire Fel'annár to tell our Lord Commander Squire Tantor what Our Lady Arya has charged him with, his mission for this lifetime of service he has chosen. Step forward, Squire Fel'annár Zionor. Ortalan gestured with his arms, and Fel'annár felt Benzir pushing him from behind. Shooting an irritated glance at the Domini warrior, he strode forward, Linon and Tensari at his sides, and Benzir right behind. Manon smiled at Onara, standing just as close to her as Benzir had. The crowds stepped back, forming a path from one side of Airland to the other, all the way up to Tantor himself. They murmured quietly as Fel'annár passed, some of them seeing him up close for the first time. He was to reveal Arya's mandate, as they all had before him, and almost always it was to serve as your commander sees fit. But many here knew of Fel'annár's previous life, knew that he had been a light wielder. Somehow they understood it would be different for him. Stopping before the commander, Fel'annár, Linon, and Tensari saluted, while Benzir was slower, perhaps forgetting that he was a warrior once more. Squire Fel'annár Zionor, give your voice to Our Lady Arya's mission. What has she asked of you? There was nothing wrong with Fel'annár's memory in his second life. He recalled those divine words perfectly, and although they seemed overly simple for the implications they carried, he said them anyway, knowing full well the reaction they would garner. I am to destroy the Tel'aran. I am to kill Arzen, walk the road to the end. Only those closest to Fel'annár heard his words, and for a moment Tantor, Ortalan, Narrator, and Sebat stared incredulously at the novice Shirán, who had uttered the words as if he were giving directions to some lost beggar. Tantor turned to his general, and then back to Fel'annár. What do you think she meant by walk the road to the end? I don't know, Commander. I only assumed she meant to continue trying until I die. Tantor stepped back while Ortalan stepped forward. With the powerful voice of a seasoned general, he repeated Fel'annár's mission, and then waited for the silence to disappear. It didn't. Fel'annár turned his back on the dignitaries and allowed his gaze to wander over the shocked faces of his fellow Shirán. He hated this, knew he had been in similar circumstances before. Expectant faces, hopeful souls. Damn his ability to wield light. He didn't want it, the attention it brought. All he wanted was to serve, to blend into the crowds of warriors and do his part, as he had promised. Features hardening, he turned back to Tantor, willing him to do something, say something to break the awkward silence. It was Ortalan who obliged, and within moments music began to play as more torches flared into being. Slowly, voices rose, and the Shirán turned to their games and their songs, and the smells of food began to impregnate the air. A hand on his shoulder, and he turned to Tensari. You look angry. Why can't I just lead a normal life for once? Is that too much to ask? Because you are not normal, Fel'annár. Thank you, Tensari. That makes me feel much better. You know what I mean. You have magic. What did you expect? She was right in that, he supposed, but he didn't have to like it. From close by, Narrator, Tantor, and Sebat watched him disappear into the crowds. Oh, sacrificial lamb of Arya, mumbled Sebat. Kill Arzen, no less. Narrator could no longer see Fel'annár as she turned to her fellow commander and the High Master. Arya's assassin. Tantor met her unusually expressive eyes. He'd rarely seen such emotion on her face. It makes me wonder at the mercy of the gods, whether it even exists, I mean. They'd all seen Fel'annár's face, the way his anger had spiked as he stood defiant before the crowds. He is nothing but a weapon, a means to a happy ending. But for who, Sebat? For who? Tantor saw Narrator's heart then, just for a moment, a glimmer of goodness, of regret, for Sebat was surely right. Fel'annár was a weapon against Arzen's Tel'aran, against the revenant god himself. He was, perhaps, their best hope for a future in peace for Nazaran. But had Arya not told him to follow that road to the end? No. Whatever happy ending Fel'annár could bring for others, it surely wouldn't be for himself. Chapter 2. Empire. All elves are born with a guiding light, an inborn key to move forward.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?